for the last 10 years, while he's been employed with the Cleveland Browns, nobody could tell you what Paul Depodesta really did for the Browns. We knew that his role, his quote unquote role, was chief strategy officer, but nobody knew what exactly that meant. What was he strategizing about? What was he actually doing? Now, we had bits and pieces here and there. Some reporters would be saying, he advocated, to instead of hiring Freddie Kitchens when John Dorsey was here, he'd be advocating for, a guy like Sean McDermott or maybe even a Kevin Stefanski. Or no, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. He wanted Sean McDermott instead of Hugh Jackson, and he wanted Kevin Stefanski instead of Freddie Kitchens. That was the correct pairing. But we just got bits and pieces about what really Paul Depodesta was supposedly doing behind the scenes as the chief strategy officer. And, nobody really knew what Paul Depodesta was doing. And especially with the biggest trade in probably the Browns' history as a franchise, trading for Deshaun Watson, giving up the 3 first-round picks, fully guaranteeing the $230 million contract for a quarterback like Deshaun Watson. You came with a lot of baggage with all the different allegations and lawsuits against him. Everybody wanted to know, and still wants to know, who decided in the Browns front office to go after a guy like Deshaun Watson, who had a shady past, or at least not even a shady past, but a shady couple of years, who many people were very high or very low on in terms of, is he a bad person? Why would you give up this amount of assets for a person that may be suspended for a long period of time? All of these questions, so many people have been asking this for years. And finally, we've gotten some person who had intimate knowledge of the proceedings to give us a peek behind the curtain and tell us what actually happened. So, again, this comes from Pro Football Talk over on NBC, Mike Florio's stuff. Former Browns chief strategy officer Paul Depodesta was asked about his role in a disastrous Deshaun Watson trade. Said Depodesta, "We all own that." So again, it's the company line of, it was a organizational failure, which it was. It was an organizational failure. And again, we still do not know the specific person to first bring up a trade for Deshaun Watson. We still don't know that. Many people, including Jimmy Haslam, and of course I couldn't find the quote, but Jimmy Haslam basically said it was the football operations department of the Cleveland Browns. Whatever the hell that means is, I don't know what the hell, football operations department means when you're a football franchise. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but from all indications, from everybody who's said anything, with reporters, it sounded like it came from Paul Depodesta and Andrew Berry. But we're going to get into the article here. Again, this is on Pro Football Talk on NBC Sports. This is the key thing here. He sat down with an interview with the Denver Post talking about, the Rockies and that, about his role that he's going to have with the Rockies and try and help them, be more successful. But anyways, not important. This is what we want to talk about. Deshaun Watson, right? So Depodesta, when he's asked about what his decision or what his role it was when the Browns made the decision to go after Deshaun Watson, he says, "Here's what I would say, and I truly believe this. I believe that most of the decisions, especially the big ones like that, are organizational decisions, right? I'm not a believer in the King Scout situation where there is one guy who makes every call. The jobs are too complex. The decisions are too hard. They impact too many different things. So I always think these sort of collective decisions, it can be hard to get unanimous opinions on these types of things. Everyone who is a part of that, we all own that. We just do. That's part of the deal." So, interesting. This is an interesting phrase here. It can be hard to get unanimous opinions on these types of things. Everyone who was a part of that, we all own that. We just do. That's part of the deal. So to me, what's interesting about that quote is that it sounds like Paul Depodesta is sort of saying that there was a little bit of dissent amongst the Browns brass when it came to deciding whether to trade all those assets for Deshaun Watson. Because he said it's very hard to get everybody on board, especially with a decision like that. So, very curious to see, or I would like to find out. And Mike Florio goes on further in the article, basically saying the same thing. It's very interesting to find out that not everybody was on board with bringing Deshaun Watson in, because we're always told that it's a collaborative effort when it comes to the Browns and this front office, the Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski work in tandem with one another, and everything's in sync, and everyone's, working as a team and all this other stuff. And when you find out that the biggest decision the franchise has ever made, right? It's clearly, at least in the last 27 years since they've been back, the biggest decision of the franchise's history. There's dissent among this, but I would like to find out who that dissent, who was the dissenter? Who was the person that was not going along with Deshaun Watson becoming a Cleveland Brown? Now, again, I'm going to say this again. We have no idea. This is the same answer that we have been given time after time after time after time again. Jimmy and Dee Haslam were out there earlier this year in April, before the season started, before even the draft happened, saying Deshaun Watson's trade was a mistake. It was an organizational failure. Put the blame on us, meaning Jimmy and Dee Haslam. Paul Depodesta comes out here and he says it was an organizational failure. But his big thing that he said was that there was dissent. Not everybody was on board. And from every reporter and every report that we've gotten about this absolutely inexcusable, hindsight being 2020, inexcusable trade and guaranteed contract, every single report that we have gotten is that this started from Andrew Berry and Paul Depodesta. And so now that we have a clearer picture as to what actually went on when the Browns were deciding to go after Deshaun Watson, now we have another new question. Who was in dissent? Who was in dissent? Was it Kevin? Because it certainly wasn't Andrew Berry. It certainly wasn't Paul Depodesta. Who was in dissent? Was it Kevin? Because a lot of Kevin Stefanski defenders say, well, Kevin didn't want to go along with it, but the team wanted to go along with it, so he went along with everybody else. Did Kevin have some qualms about Deshaun Watson joining the Browns? Deshaun Watson didn't really like Kevin Stefanski's offense. He said that before he declined coming to the Browns. So again, I am very, very interested in finding out who was in dissent on bringing Deshaun Watson in. Because, again, this is like the first time that we're actually getting behind the scenes, peel the curtain back moments about the biggest moment in modern Cleveland Browns history. The most infamous moment of the last 25 years of Cleveland Browns football. And it still raises more questions than it answers. Because, again, Deshaun Watson, hindsight being 2020, was one of the worst mistakes that any franchise could possibly make. Everybody. I mean, me at the time, okay? Me at the time. I did not want Deshaun Watson because I just did not want to deal with the baggage that came with Deshaun Watson. I understood Deshaun Watson was a top 5 caliber quarterback and a Pro Bowl quarterback on a very bad Houston Texans team. But with all the baggage that he was going to bring along with him coming from Houston, with all the different accusations and everything that surrounded him, there was no way in hell I would give up those many assets. I wouldn't even give up anything to go and get him. I did not want him. I wanted to ride with Baker for one more year. I wanted to see what Baker had when he had a healthy arm, one more year. But again, when you have Paul Depodesta come out here and say that it was an organizational failure, everybody, we all own it. It was an organizational failure. But when he also says it's hard to get everybody on board with a decision like this, to me, that sounds like there was someone who did not agree with what the Browns were going to do. Because we all know from all reports, again, from all reports, because they don't tell you anything. The Browns don't tell you anything. Nobody in that building tells you anything. So when someone like Paul Depodesta says something, you got to listen, because this never happens. This never happens. But when Paul Depodesta says that it is very hard to get people on board with a decision like this, I'm very interested to see who this person was. Was it actually Kevin Stefanski? Because again, every single Kevin Stefanski defender likes to say that he didn't want to have Deshaun Watson because Deshaun didn't fit his offense, but the Browns went along with it. And he went along with the team. The Browns wanted him. The Browns wanted Deshaun Watson, and Kevin acquiesced to everybody else and said, "You know what? If you guys want him, we'll try and work him into the team." It's just an insane admission by a senior member of the Cleveland Browns during the time, which absolutely destroyed most of this fan base. It has set back the team for many a year. And to finally have some clarification and have just, even if it's just a little breadcrumb of what happened in the thought process and the mindset as to why the Cleveland Browns thought it was a good idea to go after Deshaun Watson, and the thought process in that building of how they came to a decision to get Deshaun Watson. To me, this is a very, very interesting story. It is very interesting. And like I said, I hope that later on, as years go by, as we get further and further away from the debacle of Deshaun Watson, I hope that we'll find out who this dissenter was. I really do. I really do. But I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked. But I just think that, again, for a franchise that has been so closed, behind closed doors, for a story like this to come out, and for Paul Depodesta to finally be on the record saying, the thought process behind the trade for Deshaun Watson, to me, I think this is one of the most fascinating stories to come out about the Cleveland Browns. I really do. But